This question is for Michelle, and it relates back to a previous presentation. So the Vance saying climbing to somewhere really terrible. It's kind of a question, having God isn't enough. What does it mean to really hear that?
That's a great question. It was, my heart actually sunk when I heard that, because I felt that person's despair in that moment. I felt that they had no idea what was wrong with them, that they would still feel this loneliness despite this wonderful relationship they had with God. And for me, it made me really curious about what was going on and wanting to know more. So when I discovered the dimensions, and even before I discovered the dimensions, I had come up with the loneliness diagram, and it was only through reading more that I realized that this is what was going on. And that spiritual part is nourishing, but as Kurt said, you need that human contact. You need that human connection in order to feel whole.
Dr. Clark.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for a lovely afternoon. All 6 presenters. It's been a phenomenal afternoon. I've learned a lot, got lots of notes, all of which I'll amalgamate into courses I'm going to teach in the future. So thank you. I don't even have to think anymore. Just come and hang out with you guys. So thanks a lot. So I'm going to try to do a harpoon question. I don't mean that in a lethal kind of way, but start with Michelle, because Michelle, you said that you gave it escape loneliness, right? So what I heard from that was that loneliness is a state of being for a lot of people, and you have to escape from it. Now, the harpooning dimension, I'd like you to respond to it, but it affects the other 2 presenters too, right? So Jesse and Caitlin, if maybe you can talk a bit about it, because friendship has a way of, my question is, can people be cured of loneliness? Okay, but to understand that, what is the disease of loneliness?
Great question. Can they be cured? When I spoke with my participants, they did not have a hope that they could be cured of loneliness, because they mentioned that they had to drill down through layers and layers in order to realize what the root of the loneliness was. However, when I mentioned escape, it's because one in particular mentioned that they weren't looking to cure their loneliness. They were only looking to get temporary relief from it. But they were young, which was really quite interesting, because the older ones were looking at more permanent solutions. We're looking at better ways of coping. But even then, one mentioned to me, it's like the self-care and the dealing with the loneliness on a daily basis is like sandbagging. And every once in a while, the waters rise too high, and it overwhelms me. So, can you cure loneliness? That's a great question, and one very worthy of looking into in further studies.
Thanks, Michelle. I mean, I think a really interesting thing for future research would be different kinds of loneliness, because I think there are some times in your life where, like, you know, if you might be in a new area and just kind of getting out and being in space and meeting a few new people, you feel really good, right? Like you suddenly don't feel as lonely in that moment, but it's not quite the deep connection, right? So there's different kinds of loneliness and also different kinds of connection too. And so, I mean, you might have lots of casual friends, but be lacking in that deeper sense, or that soul friend, or someone who can connect with you on, you know, on a spiritual level, or something else you're passionate about. So I'm seeing, you know, there's so much more here, right? Amazing we couldn't cover it all in like 20 minutes, you know, collectively. Yeah, so I'm really interested, I mean, after these conversations and learning more about types of connection and types of loneliness and how they might correspond. And I don't know what you saw, Caitlin.
So in thinking about this, I mean, I'll defer to you as far as whether or not we can actually cure loneliness, to Michelle, because I'm no expert on that. But one of the things that I found in the research I was doing, in the interviews, the stories that I heard, was that the difference in what seemed to bring a reprieve to disconnection and to loneliness was this feeling of belonging. So as both of you mentioned, that deeper connection, that chance to feel seen and really heard, and as one participant shared, precious to a community for the first time. I would say that's not a cure, but maybe a reprieve, maybe a chance to feel something different for a moment.
Great. Caitlin, you can hang on to the mic, because amidst all the wonderful things people are saying about your presentations, we have a question for you from Sarah. Sarah says, I've appreciated the online spaces that have become more popular and cultivated during COVID, but I have a couple of questions. We have to build up one another and build relationships and be genuine in our vulnerability. Did people think that it was possible to be authentic and engage with others in a solely physical space? Are people interested in going back to in-person only?
So this is a lot of why I went into this research, was that I wanted to know more as we venture into this. We were pretty much solely in person in a lot of cases. And then because of COVID, lots of communities went totally online because we couldn't gather in person in any larger groups than quite small. And then now, as we enter into this new phase of life, whatever we're calling it, there's this question of how do we continue to form community? And so from what I heard from participants, it is possible to have real meaningful connections and build community online, fully online. And that's meaningful. And it's meaningful for folks to be in person and to be able to gather for retreats and do those things that we can only really kind of do in person. What I found separated it was sometimes there's a lack of connection when we join in different formats of worship or join in different ways. So when we can see each other on screen, as one of the participants shared, we can make eye contact. We can see one another. We can hear. We can, whether that be physically or metaphorically, we can connect in a way that's possible. But like here today, I can't see any of you online. I can't actually even hear you all that well. And so there's this disconnect. There's this you speaking through other people who are doing a fantastic job, I hope, of conveying that what you're trying to share. But there's this inability for me to connect with you on a deeper level. And so I've heard some stories of communities who found some ways to make those barriers a little bit more fluid, a little bit less concrete, to make screens like this one have people we could see so that we could have kind of a more one-on-one group conversation, and ways that made that that difference of community, the different places that you're coming at it from, a bit less clear, and created that feeling of connection within everyone, if that answers the question.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to paraphrase the next question online. It's about, essentially, for you, Jesse, about denominations. And did you see any denominational variants? For example, the idea of testimony. The person asking the question said they're not from a tradition that uses testimony that much, so it makes me wonder about denominational.
Yeah, that was me. I added
that.
That was a UCC church. I'll leave you to wonder which UCC. Yeah, and I remember that being described at that church as like, this is what we call testimony. People would give a spiritual reflection, but you're right, they didn't use the word testimony, but I love the word, so I used it. And because I think it has real power. I mean, that giving of a personal experience it's a way to connect. I mean, one church I've been a part of started having participants do spiritual reflections in like the weekly email. And I read one and it resonated. And I wrote to the lady that wrote it and thought, wow, this is amazing. This made me think of this in my life. And she wrote back and said, this is what's going on in my life. And, now we're chatting more. So just, any opportunity to have that personal piece. I don't know if this is answering the denominational question. It was mostly United-ish folks that I interviewed. Actually, some I'm not even certain what their denomination was. I didn't really have enough of a sample size, unfortunately, to get a bit more variance in how different denominations are doing connection and how folks are finding connection. Because that would be really interesting to see, like what's effective in different kinds of communities. So subject for future research.
That'd be a great MA thesis. I'll let our recruitment coordinator know. Yeah. All right. Is there one more question? We don't have any more online, but we have time for one more in person. Who wants to ask the final question of the day? Or make a comment. Comments are also welcome. Kevin.
This perhaps could be a general question that any of you could answer. I was thinking particularly of Caitlin and Jesse, it resonating in my mind around your presentations particularly, but perhaps, Michelle, you also might have something for this. What role or responsibility do we have in facilitation for cultivating friendship or cultivating the success of online communities?
Do you want to start or do you want me to start? Okay. I love that question because I think it absolutely is a pastoral church leadership congregational responsibility. I think we see, even aside from kind of the health benefits of combating loneliness, what it does for your soul and your spiritual life, the way some of these folks talked about how it enriched their relationship with God, to have a friend, another Christian friend, to have these conversations. So yes, I love the question, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to say, yes, I think this is a very important thing for all of us who are parts of churches and parts of faith life to be cultivating as best we can.
So one of the stories I heard from communities was about how the space was formed in an online community, how that was led, what mattered as part of forming that. And a lot of the church communities that I heard about that were fully online were church plants. They began online and had that opportunity to have those discussions as a community, as part of the leadership, but also as the wider community of that community. Was how do we structure this? What matters to us as a community? What helps this community to grow, to learn, to be in deeper connection with one another? And throughout those questions, the leadership had a big part in helping to cultivate that space, helping to listen to what people were asking for and needing out of that space and what mattered to them. And I think they also invited the conversations to be open in a way that led to a lot of what came from that structure. And so I would say that it's kind of a two-pronged. It's a listening and, really encouraging that feedback to be able to hear what matters in community, and it helps people to feel connected and feel belonging. And then it's following through with that. And then maybe it's circular because it probably leads back then to the first part.
I'd just like to add that it's about creating the ethos of connection and letting others take the lead on it, but modeling it and promoting it so that it becomes something that everyone is a part of. And it's not just, okay, we rely on the minister or we rely on the leadership in order to make these connections for us, but that everyone feels that they are a part of a community that is always reaching out and being friendly and being welcoming. And, Catherine Ann talked about who is your neighbor. Well, answering that question all the way from the children up to the elders.
Thanks. I'm going to sneak in one more quick question because it's from a member of the executive of the Board of Governors of AST, and there we go. So this is from Reverend Dr. Linda Yates. This question is for any of you, but maybe if one of you wouldn't mind just giving a quick response. She says, I think the first time I felt lonely was 3 years ago when I retired. As I reflected on it, my identity as a minister was really important to my own sense of belonging, and that was disrupted in a profound way. What did you learn from your participants about the impact of role identity?
Trust Linda for a question like that.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to say something? No.
I can. we can share.
Any of us can say something. Go ahead.
So I'm not entirely sure if this answers your question directly, but one of the things I heard from participants, or one participant in particular, about role identity was the folks who they saw coming to the community that they were a part of and the roles that they played. So in one of the online communities in particular, they found that many people who came to the community were folks who had been on the fringes, folks who would self-identify as not really belonging before, not really feeling connected to a community before, or like that really fit for them in the previous times that they had tried. And so that seemed to be a real place where, you know, misfits could form, you know, where and find that space together. And so they kind of shared that role identity, I think.
Really quickly, maybe?
Okay. Super quickly. Yes, it was something that participants did tell me about. And for confidentiality's sake, I'm not going to go very far into it. But what I would like to say is that there are certain aspects of your role which will put you in positions that will make you lonelier, because you won't have the ability to make the connections that you'd like to make, especially in rural contexts where you know, you wear many hats, and if you're in a position of leadership in any way, you have to take that into consideration. And so, yes, it is something, not the loss of the role necessarily, but having the role was where there was a lot of loneliness.